Hello, and welcome to How DevOps Keeps DBAs Safe from Being Automated Out of a Job. This is a panel webcast brought to you by Redgate Software, and I am so excited today to introduce you to my fellow panelists. My name is Kendra Little, and I work for Redgate Software, but more importantly, I want to introduce you to the fine folks who will be helping talk about their experiences with DevOps, which are broad and varied, and how DevOps really can help you in your career in the long term. So with no further ado, let's start with Hamish. Hamish, tell us a little bit about you.
G'day, hi everyone. I'm Hamish Watson. I live in Christchurch, New Zealand, which means it's very, very early in the morning, which is probably best for everyone because that means I'm a little bit tired and not as energetic if any of you have ever met me. I am a DevOps bloke, which means that I embrace all things DevOps. And in fact, in the 20 odd years that I've been a DBA, DevOps has helped me become a better DBA. And so this particular session today is near and dear to my heart because it's kept me employed.
Love it.
My turn, I guess. My name is Kellen Putvan Gorman. I am a data platform architect with Microsoft. I'm supposed to be working in analytics and AI. I was told when I got there that I wouldn't be using my database skills as much. But my 20 years of database administration and DevOps has kind of come back to haunt me. They need me a lot more on that side than we first thought. And so I have been automating a lot of our solutions within my group because we found out they can't get to the analytics and AI without me getting them the data.
So you're DevOps even when you take a job that isn't DevOps.
Exactly. That's exactly what happened. Yeah.
Okay.
And how about you, William?
Yeah, my name's William Durkin. I'm well, at least on the slide it says I'm a data platform architect. I started a company, Data Masterminds, with friends of mine. We do all the things around Microsoft Data Platform. We mentor, we consult, develop, all these sorts of things. As the other people on the panel, I'm a DBA by trade, and the DevOps thing is just more and more important. And I'm maybe not into it as deep as the others, but I certainly accept that it's the future for at least my career.
And we are really, I think, a very global panel. So right now, I mean, I live in Oregon in the United States, but right now I'm in Cambridge in the UK. Hamish, you're at home in New Zealand, right?
Sure am.
And William, are you in Germany?
Yes.
And Kellen, where in the world are you?
It changes weekly, but today I'm just over the river in New Jersey from Philadelphia.
So we really do have really good global distribution today. So we've got a bunch of folks who are with us live. So folks, there is a Q&A panel. So if you've got questions as we go through this, I'll be looking at the Q&A panel as we talk through things. So feel free to pop in questions, comments, and anything else. So our first question up for discussion is, which traditional DBA tasks have already been automated away? And then how do you expect this to change in 5 years? Do you have any predictions of more things that DBAs used to spend a lot of time doing that either just don't need to be done by a person or just take very little time these days?
Who's going to jump in first?
Go for it.
Of course, backups, if we're talking about on-premises, we're still performing those, but much of it can be automated into the cloud. There's a lot of plugins as well as processes and products and appliances that can take care of that. Tuning itself. Tuning used to be, I mean, I come back from the old Oracle world. We had something called util-E and util-B and util-E-stat. So begin and end. These were monstrous reports that just dumped out all kinds of script that you needed to translate and be able to, come up with actual synopsis and conclusions of what was required for the performance tune. Even AWS warehouses, data, as well as we get into DMVs and the query store, they require a lot of expertise, and that is being automated through automatic tuning processes and these different advisors. So that is disappearing as well. And those are the two areas that I see a big change. It used to be a primary role of the database administrator.
Mm-hmm.
Clicking next, I find
which is surprisingly time consuming. It's true.
It is.
It's actually true.
I always wanted to be paid by the progress bar because I made a career out of watching progress bars and clicking next. And so this is something that has been automated away, because now when I install SQL Server, there's a couple of ways I can do it. And I'm not even going to get to my passion for a bit. I script all my installs. I automate all my installs. I miss clicking next, but I don't really, because I can almost code better than I can concentrate.
Mhm.
The thing I'm moving towards, how this will change in 5 years' time, well, in fact, it's kind of changing now, containerization. I love that stuff.
Right. So with containerization, so kind of the part of the magic of it is essentially you don't have to install anything. So it's not
Yeah.
just that you've automated the install, you're essentially kind of skipping it.
And with the cloud, of course, it's versionless. So we're getting rid of a lot of that, and we're letting other people maintain it.
Absolutely.
So we've kind of covered, so backups, tuning, I think, is a really interesting point. It's the early stages, but it is starting to look like it's actually really quite a doable thing, like automatic index tuning, automatic query tuning, installation, and a lot of configuration, it sounds like. And yeah, this used to be, I think we've kind of covered, that used to be the full-time job of a DBA, and it is
For me, it was.
Yeah. I remember learning to install SQL Server, and it did take a long time. William, do you have other stuff on this, or are you kind of like, no, you guys got it covered?
Yeah, it's the base administration stuff. It just disappears. And as Hamish has already hinted at with the container thing, upgrading is going to be a lot easier in the next 5 years, for sure.
And even downgrading.
Even
like in
downgrading,
certain cases, you can even go back a version without having to restore a database or lose data, or even, actually have to worry about that just with a brief outage. So
I do want to say one thing, that if anyone on this call is worried that, because since SQL Server 7, it's been self-tuning or auto-tuning. But don't worry. If you've got worries about your job, about the database being self-aware and tuning itself, just use an ORM. You'll get some of that back.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Maybe you should give some context for that. Just, we may have some people who don't know what an ORM is, haven't worked with one yet, haven't done that. So maybe give a little bit of context if people don't already get the joke.
An ORM is like entity framework, and it's an object relational mapper, where you can write, instead of writing a fantastically tuned stored procedure, you can have 1,000 lines of spaghetti code for the same type of query. It's a code first approach. And look, I don't mean to make fun of it. I cut my teeth on it many haircuts ago, but you've got to be aware of some of the limitations and things it brings to the table. So yeah, I apologize to the 20 actual DBAs who use ORMs out there.
But we have to admit the database is going to be guilty until proven innocent, and that'll keep us quite busy.
Oh, yeah. I love it.
The automation does, this is part of it, is in its own way, like a lot of these things, they can even increase the amount of work as you want. It's just that the people may be doing slightly different things than they were doing before. So one of the things that, so we at Redgate care a lot about source control. So obviously I'm biased in asking this question, but you could look at this and be like, DBAs don't need to learn source control, right? Like, you can have whatever opinion is valid, but I'm curious to know, right now, a lot of DBAs, don't use source control on a regular basis. Is this something that a forward-looking DBA should learn? Is it something they can put off? What is your take on source control and how critical it is going to be to the future of DBA jobs?
We're waiting for you, Hamish. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Begin.
Just taking a big breath before my spiel. For me, source control, I always use the analogy of oxygen, because I've quite often been in tight spots, tight places. And if I've got enough oxygen, I'll survive. And source control is very analogous to that, because I've been in some tight spots where source control has helped me. And the reason why and how it's helped me is because I now know all the changes that have been made to my database. My database is represented as a model in source control as code. And what that means is that instead of those old days where people would just make out of process changes to the poor database, we can now track those. But more importantly, if I do something crazy, maybe, I can.
What are the
So,
chances?
yeah, I know, right? Source control allows me to roll back to, undo those the commits that I've done to it before I go anywhere near the database in question. And the times I speak to crowds and I say, hey, who here has this database in source control? When I started asking this question in 2013, 14, almost no hands would go up. But thankfully, there's tools like Redgate that now make it so easy. You have no excuse not to have your database in source control. Have it there so that it's versioned. And, the most important thing for me is around versioning, but also having representation of the database model so that when we punch out our environments, our databases, we have a source of truth. We know exactly what we're in for. It's not like, well, I think UAT is this. No, UAT is built from source control, and we have clear, concise knowledge of what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you're saying source control and the actual DDL is usually what you're checking into source control, I want to take it one step further and say that many times when you're doing releases, not only is the DDL being changed, but the actual data itself. I'm a strong believer in a product like SQL Clone, SQL Provision, because you may have mass data that you don't care as much about, but being able to check the data itself. Many times as people would be rolling out changes very, very quickly, they can make changes to data as well. When we start talking about virtualized databases, I think it gives us the option to check in the data, the actual headers to those files as well. And many products allow that. It may take up a little bit more space in source control, but it's worth it. Having some kind of virtualized database backup, something that has that data snapshot, something that has that ability to recover from if there is a data change that they can't roll back from.
Yeah. I remember doing a lot of releases. I don't know if any of you guys have ever done these releases. Back when I worked in companies that did like waterfall and we would release every 3 months, we would take the system down and take a massive SAN snapshot of every database on the system and then release all of these changes. And just we had frequent go, no go decisions about should we roll back, and no one ever wanted to roll back to those snapshots, but we were glad we had them, right? But like,
yes.
Yeah, we've got to have a better way to do it than that. Like literally snapshotting everything at once while everything's offline. Like we can't live like that. So we have better ways to do it now. That was 15 years ago, right?
New technology, you usually don't have to take it offline anymore. You can make that instantaneous snapshot and move forward. But I think it's worthwhile of saying, data is that gold. Do you really want to have these concerns about not getting your data back? I have worked for one company where I had to go in and report that there was 40% data corruption in the systems. That is not a fun conversation to have. And this had happened from massive release of taking on Agile with no DevOps in place and nobody really thinking this through. So I've seen the opposite side of that where it went really, really wrong and there was no way to get it back. You just never want to be there. I'm done giving the horror story.
That's a bad day.
Yeah, I'm not in my happy place.
So the difficult thing as well from a DBA standpoint, especially for a lot of companies that have just not seen the DevOps pipeline work. They've worked on the old traditional way, like Kendra has said, take a snapshot, quiesce the system so nobody can break things. They don't know a different way, and to convince them that there is a better way is, it's like trying to convince somebody of a different religion almost. Forget what you've known before. This is really what's going to happen. We have a round earth, not a flat earth. Here's the proof. And at least in my experience with the clients that we talk to, if they've never done that before, then it can be an extreme challenge to explain that to them. The source controlling is the very first step to even be able to do that, for sure.
Yeah, but So source controlling is important. You've actually kind of perfectly led into the second question, William, and maybe this is part of how you talk to those clients. I'm kind of interested because in terms of, I was reading a paper today. The DevOps Institute came out with an upskilling white paper, and essentially in terms of job skills, there's a couple really interesting things in there. In terms of hiring, they say that almost equally personal skills are looked for, or interpersonal skills are looked for as much as technical skills. But when it comes to technical skills, they're like, yeah, it's all about knowing automation. So what are the key elements of automation that specifically DBAs should learn about? And I think this will tie in, William, into like when you're talking to people about the new way, about how things would change, what are the key elements of this that really give value to people?
Well, basically, the first slide was about what things are already automated or already removed from a day-to-day life. I push strong with that with our clients to say, like, use things like PowerShell, remove the mundane, boring tasks from your life. That's not what you're there for. Copying a file from A to B, that's what a computer is there for. Automate these absolutely ridiculous tasks away so that you can spend your time and your brain cycles on something valuable for the business. So in this case, trying to convince a client recently, they should take regular masked copies of production into their development environment. And they were saying, yeah, but that takes us 2 days. It's a 20 gigabyte database and it takes them 2 days. So first of all,
there's many ways we could optimize this.
Correct. So
this faster hardware.
No. It wasn't the speed of the hardware. It was the click next,
manual steps.
Click next.
Oh, I can do that.
Yeah, exactly right. So it's identifying the time wasting steps in any process and removing them. And luckily, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. In the PowerShell DBA tools, anybody on this webinar who's not heard of DBA tools, go and look for it. dbatools.io. Almost every single DBA task has been made into a command in PowerShell. You can take a day or a week learning the commands. It's really simple. And all of a sudden, that 2 days is down to 5 minutes of copying files around, which is
William,
done for you.
You are a contributor to that, right?
Yeah, okay, so full disclosure, I'm a contributor to that project.
Well, no, that's
it's an
great.
Open source
That's
project,
awesome.
But yeah.
People like William are doing your work for you and will even help you use it for free.
Correct, exactly.
It's very beneficial to somebody like myself who only writes stuff in Bash and is still trying to, build up my PowerShell skills. It took a lot of the extra learning hurdle out of the realm for me because I find PowerShell really verbose. I'm like, no, I can't do this. So it's very beneficial.
It's very beneficial for people like me who write crap code. I had 20 lines of T-SQL and about 10 lines of PowerShell to be doing some fantastic brilliance, and it worked maybe 59% of the time. It was one line of DBA tools PowerShell, and it was like, and I wrote a tweet and I wrote a blog about it, and I got really excited, and now I'm going to be employed for a lot longer because DBA tools not only cares about my database more than I do, but they're better at it than me too. So thank you, William, and the rest of the crew. It's fantastic tools, man. All right.
There's a huge cultural challenge there too. We're trying to explain to DBAs that taking 2 days to do a database refresh is not adding value to the company. They think, I'm busy for 2 days. This means I have value. My boss sees me working, instead of saying, automating this is not automating you out of a job.
No, exactly.
More automation is value. And you get to actually provide value to projects and provide it into work and making sure that releases go well and building out the ability to bring in more revenue and value into the company that people are not seeing.
Exactly.
Those 2 days could be spent learning how to tune indexes and query. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And for me, keeping me from being bored, which means I'll get into trouble. So I'm all for that.
go ahead, William.
You're automating yourself into a job and not out of a job.
Yes.
You're removing the crap that you don't need to do, and then you can concentrate on the cool stuff.
Yeah. One of the things I learned over the years, it took me a long time to learn this, was just that to be good at automation, you actually don't have to be like great at writing PowerShell. You don't actually have to be a genius programmer, because the key is you really don't have to write everything yourself. Like when I started out, I wanted to write my own like index maintenance job. And I wanted to like craft the T-SQL for it and make it perfect and have it be my like perfect optimized script that I had done. And then I looked around and people like Ola Hallengren started coming out with free tools. And then I realized that I could hook into different things. And then I could spend my time figuring out other things and learning more. So a lot about being good at automation is figuring out, is there a free tool that does this great? Is there a vendor tool that does this well in a way that's going to be more reliable and save me more time than me writing it myself and then learning to support it and mixing those in with code that you write yourself. So getting involved in the community and asking folks, hey, how do you do this? What's a good way to solve this problem can save you so much time in automation. So there is this real social element to automation that I think DBAs kind of need to learn. Hey, where are the places where I can get feedback on what's the best way to do this? What's the best way to tackle this problem?
There is a kind of a desire to be this army of one as a DBA.
Yeah.
And I think it's essential to step back and not reinvent the wheel. I had this conversation, I think Grant was on it on Twitter today, that I feel that I learn more about whatever I'm trying to do by banging my head against it until I figure it out. So I may get more depth of knowledge, but is it really the best use of my time? If somebody's already created it, I shouldn't be the one to do that. So I'm learning, and I'm doing it even in the role I'm in now. I'm trying to automate using Azure DevOps with the actual ADF, the data factory, data flows, and know that I'm not the best person to be building out the original piece in this. So I went to my coworker and said, help me with this, then I will reverse engineer it, simplify it, and automate it. That is a much better use of our time. And that's where you kind of come across with cross groups, instead of siloing and bringing in those specialty skills so that you do it the best way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that point of the step of figuring out what should I automate. Isn't it important?
I can figure that part out. I'm like, how long are you spending on doing that? No. We are automating this. Yeah, that's me. I bring that skill set, but should I be doing this part? No. There's a part that somebody else is much more skilled in.
So we've talked a little bit about refreshing development environments. And when I first started, like when I was trying to get a DBA job, I was sort of like moving my way towards the SQL Server. I got a job doing build operations. And my job was to refresh dev environments. This was 15 years ago. And it would take between 2 and 3 weeks for me to build out a dev environment. And if anything went wrong during that period, I'd have to start over. So we would only refresh these dev environments, like every 6 months, every 1 year. How often should this happen? And with the technology we're coming into now, we've talked a little bit about containerization. What is going to be possible with this soon? Like, where is this going? And should it even need a DBA? Like, how is this going to work? And will we actually have to spend time doing it? So we can be a little forward looking in this one too.
So
Hamish, your mouth is open, please.
Oh, sorry. Go, William.
For me, at least, I think you should refresh your dev and QA environments as often as possible and as rarely as necessary.
When you say rarely as necessary,
I don't know what as rarely as necessary means.
I'm trying to translate that from German. Basically, it should happen very often, but only as often as you really need it. So don't do it every day just because every day, but rather maybe for a sprint or something like that. But keep it as fresh as possible.
Right. Yeah.
And I would say it.
Oh, go for it. We don't want to lose state, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I would say, what is the cycle of the actual, let's say they're doing Scrum sprints. They're doing sprints. So every 2 weeks you would refresh it. And I also believe that every developer needs to have the ability to get to what they need and work on it and not be hindered by another developer's work and be able to merge those changes into one. They should have that technology, that app, to be able to do that. I'm also a strong believer in containerization, in pods, so that they have the entire structure, not just the database, but the application, everything else that's touching it, and be able to work on it. I hate that idea that when they go to production and all of a sudden they say, well, I didn't have that as part of my development set.
Yeah.
No, you should have the entire scope. So again, we're getting into virtualization. That's where you get into like products like Redgate, SQL provision, and that, because I also want to see it masked. If there's no reason to have, any kind of critical data in there, get rid of it. They just need to have referential integrity. They need to have something that is there that looks like the data that's in production without having it vulnerable. I have been on trains where somebody's like, well, we wanted to figure out what we were doing with production, so we printed everything out on Excel spreadsheets. I don't ever want to see that again in my entire life. So I think that's important too. I just cringed on the train. That's all I did the whole trip.
Yeah, I love looking over at someone's screen and seeing company name confidential in really big text on the screen. That's one of my favorite things to do. There are things you can buy for your screen, by the way, that mean that someone like has to do this to actually see it. But
well, still,
yeah, it's interesting. So the DBA, like in terms of the masking, you don't really want the DBA to be hey, like in charge of it, like, hey, I have to nanny your data, but you do maybe want an advisory role and some way in which, like, when new images are being created, you have an advisory role about making sure that images are going through a process of we've actually classified the fields, and maybe it's not even the DBA who has to do the work of the classification,
data security role.
Yeah. And in fact, it shouldn't be the DBA. It should be the business owner or people that understand it. If the DBA is suddenly understanding some of the business stuff, yeah, the DBA is doing something they shouldn't be doing. My personal opinion is that the DBA's role should be as a facilitator or providing the platform so that other people are empowered to be able to do those refreshes.
Right.
You definitely need the DBA to look over the process and the use of the tools, but in fact, it may be other people that are using those tools and using the process. It's a collaborative effort.
Evaluating different tools, evaluating different ways to approach it, seeing if there's, how long is it taking? Can we optimize it? Can we speed it up?
And work together.
Well, some tools are too technical for the business owner to actually put into place, but they're the ones who should be discovering what critical data is out there. And if, I will honestly say on the Oracle side, even though there is a console to allow you to discover and everything else, the process underneath the covers is quite technical. I would never expect a poor business owner to have to write out the commands to do all of that. So I think that is essential, where the DBA is another team member after the business owner has identified it, and then they build that all up into automation, and you click a button and it refreshes the databases. And if I had my way, you would take the DBA completely out of it once it's built and allow the developer to say, we're starting a refresh, or I need to test something that we're having a problem with. Go ahead and refresh. They push that button and it's refreshed for them.
Yeah, and as somebody who works for a vendor, I actually really want there to be a DBA in the mix advising me on, okay, what do you want to be different if you are using our tool, right? Or what do we not have a tool for that you think would be great? Like somebody really analyzing the process and really thinking about what works really well and what do we want more for, because whether it's, some vendor product you're using, or if you're using an open source community project, like everybody actually wants to know what is the user experience like, and that's actually not going to come from a bunch of people who are just like consuming the product. You need somebody who's actually looking at the whole thing to do that. And I think that does make sense to the DBA. So we've got a couple questions that have come in from folks as we've been going along. So Garrett would like to know, where is there good training for DevOps technologies? And I'm kind of assuming this is database DevOps technologies just because of the webinar, but maybe broader resources are good too. What do you guys like?
So I know that I have one that is deeply technical on recruiters innovation. It sounds funny because it's for recruiters, but we went technical because they were tired of recruiters calling up people and saying we need a DevOps engineer with 20 years experience. It wasn't happening.
Wait a second. I thought DevOps was about 10 years old in terms of terminology.
Yeah. So I know that one's out there. The reason that we wrote it and the reason that I ended up writing it was because there wasn't anything that we could find out there. If anybody else knows of anything, please jump in.
Well, the thing is, at least in my opinion, the DevOps itself is a nebulous term anyhow. It's more what the technologies you're going to learn is going to be single siloed technologies. For example, Azure DevOps, which is a terrible name. I wish Microsoft hadn't done that. That's the old TFS but hosted by Microsoft. And basically having build servers and the build pipeline, if you can learn each of those different technologies that work in there, that already gives you a really firm grounding in exactly how you could use that. But you can't learn our DevOps. That's the problem.
And you can't download it either, unfortunately.
No.
Yeah.
I've been trying to download DevOps for years.
I've been trying to click next on the install of DevOps and I can't.
Yeah, different tool providers will have different training on their tools. Like at Redgate, we have
sure.
Redgate University. It's very much specific to our tools. It's about how to use Redgate tools. So you can go to different vendors who provide different technologies and like get training and often free trials. So you can learn for free as well. We offer free trials of our tools. There's free versions of Azure DevOps. You can join and set up build pipelines and do all sorts of stuff as part of a free venue there. A lot of it, I think, is best when you kind of get your feet wet and start saying, okay, I want to get my code into source control. Okay, I want to learn how to automate deploys and just set yourself up with little projects based in the way that you want to go.
And I always have to say that tools is not the same as DevOps, but if you go to like Exhibia Labs, and you can even do this in Google, look up Exhibia Labs and, oh God, my brain went blank on this, the periodic table of DevOps tools. You can see all these different tools and how they might work together. It gives you high-level information on it. You can click on the links. It tells you by category where this product kind of fits into, and you'll recognize that there's such a wide field of everything, and you can start to kind of build out your own solutions. I think that's really critical to know that it's not, it doesn't tell you everything about the product, doesn't cover everything that the product does, but it kind of gives you a little bit of a scope of how big this really is.
Yeah. And my advice is for people to get a sandbox or a sandpit and play. Try some different tools out, because the tools that you're going to use are going to be different to the ones I use. But the main thing here is around process. And in terms of training for DevOps technologies, I mean, vendors do it, but in terms of what DevOps is, I mean, it's a more holistical thing around process. It's totally about the process.
My favorite book about the theory and the process, I love the book Accelerate. The primary author is Dr. Nicole Forsgren, and then co-authors are Jez Humble and Jean Kim. And it has a story part at the end. It has more theory part. It has results from a ton of surveys, and you'll learn a ton about DevOps. Whichever, you can read the whole book or kind of choose to start with the story at the end. I think it's fantastic at explaining a lot of the concepts of lean software, as well as how Agile relates to DevOps. And like, if you want to talk intelligently about DevOps in a job interview, reading that book and then having a discussion with someone about it would really warm you up on it, I think, conceptually. Love that book. And I actually love all of Dr. Forsgren's work as well. So laser eyes, let's talk about laser eyes. So, and this one is jumping ahead a little bit. In 10 years time, when something goes wrong in production, and of course we always think it's the database first, but let's just say it actually is a problem in the database, right? Like right now, and for as long as I've ever been a DBA, the DBA jumps in, triage the problem. Is that still going to be the same in 10 years? Will it be all developers? Will there be people involved at all? What are your predictions for how troubleshooting will work in 10 years? I know this one is kind of like laser eyes. It'll be laser eyes.
Yeah, and I see developers doing a lot more of the work. I'm already seeing now where developers are getting on rotation for after hours. And I have to admit, I'm not sad about that since I really hated being woke up in the middle of the night unless it was absolutely mission critical, you know. So that's how I see it changing, is that you will see DevOps operations teams that will be on call depending on where these challenges are. I think that it is going to be more in the cloud. Sorry about that background noise. But I do see it more in the cloud. I think people aren't going to want to have local data centers unless they absolutely require it. And the DBA is going to be more of that person that is taking on that automation and building more value into processes that are essential towards the business future.
Yeah, laser eyes, definitely.
Laser, definitely laser eyes.
But I think a lot of the stuff that we do now will around, shall we say, the infrastructure and operations side of the DBA life, I think will get automated away. Until quite a lot of the things, just throwing more hardware at a problem really can help. And if you have intelligent systems built up to auto scale and auto fix problems with more horsepower, then a lot of the time things will not become a production problem anymore. And if companies continue with nice, clean deployment pipelines, then if you're iterating quicker and in shorter steps, you're introducing less risk anyway. So a system should fall over much, much less often.
Yeah. And part of that is part of the whole shift left concept, where you're deploying to prod like environments. You know, some of those errors, hopefully we're going to find out way down in QA, functional test, you know, integration test, system test, whatever. But of course, you know, there's going to be some monitoring the whole way through the pipeline. So again, that we've got this consistency both of our deployment process, but more importantly, our management and monitoring processes, so that, you know, yeah, that we should not be finding major errors in production databases. Don't get me wrong, there's still going to be errors, but again, our robust monitoring solution is going to find that for us. And I hate to use an 1980s term, but it could be some form of management by exception. Do you know what I mean?
Wait, what is management by exception? What is? I don't know that 80s, 90s term.
I'm going to show how old I am. So basically, you know, management by exception is we only get the exceptions, right? So things should be monitored the whole way through. We have observability of our systems the whole way through the deployment pipeline, right through to production, and such that, you know, we don't have to look over all the little itty bitty things like DBA 101, right? Get into work, check the error log. Did anything happen overnight? No way. I should be told if there's an exception. You know, our tools and our monitoring software should be looking over everything for me, so that again, I can do higher value activities. Now, when something does go wrong and there's metrics associated with that, then of course I need to know. And I foresee that in terms of, I'm not sure what the D stands for, but I'm pretty sure D stands for database, right? In a DBA's job description. So if there's something going wrong in the database that's been highlighted, you know, and we got to troubleshoot it, yeah, I still think DBA is going to be there, because they inherently know the ins and outs of a row in a table, you know.
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting because I like the way Microsoft has started with the auto tuning for Azure SQL database, and some of this is even in the on-prem version too, where it makes like Helen was saying earlier, things like parameter sniffing that are so difficult to identify. It'll capture the pattern now. It'll put in kind of a temporary solution, but it won't like force it, because hey, maybe it's not the right solution. But then it also puts it in a table for you, and it's basically a suggestion of like, this ain't good, right? So in 10 years, it should be, I would think, at a point where it can do a little bit more sophisticated testing about making the symptom go away, but then also talk to you about, okay, the root cause of this could be in one of these things, and probably, well, who knows, maybe it's at the point that it can make a really sophisticated recommendation then about root cause. But I think we are still going to have people jobs of saying, okay, what is the right way to really kind of do we need to make a lasting architectural change to respond to this? Because I don't know that we will want it making changes. I mean, it might be biased in favor of changes that cost more money, right?
But
So we
this
will
is
want some
also,
amount of control.
but this is also something for the future of the product too. When we start implementing machine learning and, should we say, database learning, the
Right.
actual optimizer being able to make intelligent decisions as the product matures. And I think machine learning can come into play as it starts to look over logs and it sees a troubling trend and be able to say, this is going to be something you want to look at proactively to stop from having a mission critical problem.
Yeah. And the DBA's job is not only to look at those logs, but also to look at all the different ways you could do these things, right? Because there will be many different options for how you could do this and figure out when you need to use a different service for your data, right? So there'll still be a lot of choices.
Oh, yeah.
They're just getting
There'll be a lot of white noise at first. It'll quiet down as it matures, and this is how it always goes. We know this. So.
Well, the amount of data that we're going to have then too, I think will be very, very interesting in terms of like how much data, if it continues to explode, there's still going to be lots and lots of data to manage. So I love this question. This question was suggested by Kellen. What existing skills that traditional DBAs have lend to DevOps engineering and the future of the data industry? So what is it that we already have as skills that we can really build on and exploit and focus on?
So I get to start this one since I asked it. Definitely scripting. Automation and scripting we're very detail oriented by nature. I think most DBAs you have to be, and we have control issues. I think that's just the nature of most DBAs. We have to be that gatekeeper. So
I don't know what you're talking about.
I know. And this really does lend to a lot of the DevOps engineering capabilities. But scripting for me, coming over to Microsoft, I thought, I'm going to give up my Bash scripting skills. Got onto Azure and found out, it's all Bash all the time for that command line interface, and I was in heaven. I do feel that any of our scripting skills are extremely essential, that we do have a knack for learning different scripting languages that we can utilize. You can use a PowerShell wrapper and then implement all the other scripts underneath it, so you don't need to learn everything still. You're more of that controller, that helpful person that's taking everything and gluing it together and making sure that it deploys in the correct steps to capture any kind of errors or any kind of warnings and be able to report it back to the right people. Those are skills that we have naturally that should be taken forward into DevOps. Next.
Do you have Hamish? William? Hamish is just like, I'm not sure.
Yeah. You go, William. I'll go next.
Yeah, there's not much that I would want to add to that. My existing skill, being able to say no, or rather to lean towards wanting to have stability, and that's what the automation will do. It's our job as DBAs to make sure the database is always available, always online, performing the way it should. And that focus on stability and availability is exactly what helps a DevOps pipeline or engineering push actually be successful, because that's the aim, is to always be improving and making sure that the process is supporting that improvement.
Yeah. A lot of when we talk about DevOps, we talk about fast releases frequently, releasing small items. This is one of the things that in the Accelerate book that they talk about, though, is that an equally important measure is stability in terms of both number of incidents and time to recover from incidents. But that's equally as important as frequency of delivery. And a lot of times that gets kind of glossed over.
But that's part of the detail-oriented skills, is that we do want lessons learned. We want to understand why, not just, we had a failure. Why did we have a failure? How can we learn from this? How can we avoid it from happening again? Because I'm all about the uptime.
One of the things is the old F5 key, because DBAs inherently know that when they push F5, that's going to be kind of the definition of done, because it's either going to work or it's not. And one of the things a DBA is always thinking about is, as mentioned, the stability. And I think that one of the great things about that F5 mentality is they will be able to teach developers that the definition of done is working software. So if you build it, you run it, right? Because too often developers, and this is where DevOps really helps in terms of team collaboration, is developers think definition of done is, well, I've written some beautiful code, I use some tabs, I might have used some spaces, I'm off gonna have a coffee. That's not definition of done. The DBA,
So
the reason why DBAs say no is because it's, okay, what are my actions going to do to the system? The most precious resource known to humankind is data. And a DBA is a good DBA is inherently always caring about that data, which is what I think they bring to the table, that suddenly we're thinking about the end game, the result, the value that we're bringing. And that comes from 3 a.m. I've got a 1 terabyte database that's 40% corrupted, and you learn what your actions are going to do. And I think that's a valuable thing to teach development teams, and that's what DBAs bring.
And to literally bring into a development team, because part of the key of this is making the DBA role really work inside the development team so that you have input on things as they are being designed and build quality in and bring that learning in. I found this cool website today. I think it's DevOps Topologies, but they're these amazing Venn diagrams of just different models of integrating IT teams and dev teams, and including going down to the detail of different models, patterns and anti-patterns of DBAs. And one of the captions on one of the recommended diagrams, this is a characterization. I mean, this is the end of the spectrum, but it said, developers tend to think of the database as just like this dumb, persistent storage layer for data, which basically like a cardboard box. Whereas DBAs see the database as this like rich application full of different functionality that with like optimizers and features and column store indexes, and all about these features. And part of the point of DevOps is bringing, and I think the DBA really becomes somebody who can just bring that vision and that understanding of that into the dev team, so people actually know what features they can use and can actually take advantage of it.
Yeah, and write a good query.
Well, there's so much out there.
Yeah,
there's so much out there. I don't expect a developer to know everything out there. They've got so much else that they have to know. So that is my gift to them, is to come back and say, hey, there is, there is this DBCC command, or there is this util file command. There is something that can help you do your job better, and that's my job to actually bring that to the table.
Mm-hmm.
That's the value that you're able to deliver because you've automated all of the crap work. That's the whole point, right?
There is
you can't get in there.
You've automated all of the crap work or found someone else to do it. Sometimes that second one is key, because sometimes things do land on the DBA's desk that actually aren't worthy of being automated because they don't happen that often, but someone who's not the DBA could actually do them. And a lot of times we don't say no to those things and we don't push them away. We just kind of collect them, right? And then we end up with this busy task list when we could say, hey, can we hire a junior DBA? Or is there a support person who could do this? Or, right, we could actually free up some time that way. I've been very guilty of these pet things over the years that I don't really have to do, but take up a lot of time, but aren't worth being automated, right?
But that's the army of one mentality that Kellen mentioned. You're going to accept it. You're going to take it on because nobody else can do it, because you're the only one who understands everything about the data. Setting up a sensible DevOps pipeline means you hand off a ton of responsibility on that side of the deployment. Up until now, or to that point, the developers, their definition of done, as Hamish said, is their code compiles.
Yeah,
the code compiles, but has to interact with the database. And if we have that in a pipeline with a full build and test suite, then they hit their build and then see the fruits of what they've broken by it flowing all the way through to the database. And because they broke the build, they need to fix the build. So it hands back the responsibility of what they've done.
Accountability with the responsibility is extremely essential.
Yep.
I'd like to know of the team that is here, how many of you and where do you, at what point do you say something needs to be automated? Because I have a low threshold for patience on tedious tasks.
Yeah. I don't do
Get forward
day-to-day.
easy.
I'm not a production DBA anymore, but it used to be almost every single T-SQL script or PowerShell script that I wrote to do a job would be saved, because even if the boss says this is a one-time report, I only need this data now, you can be guaranteed half an hour after his meeting, he says, I need that now again. So for me, my threshold was, if I'm writing it to automate. Even if the automation is open the SQL script and run it again. It's still, I've spent that time burning my brain cycles, keep it.
And mine was always a fear, if there was any human error that could happen with human intervention, then I would automate it too. I was always scared of that. Hamish.
For me, yeah, my threshold was really low, because I always had the opinion that I wasn't the main cog. So I always wrote scripts so that if I'm away on holiday, I'm not getting called. It's like my scripts and everything that's associated with a task or whatever, and that task might be a one-off, but there's always something that will change. The example of the report, you know, I want data from this period. Oh, now I want it from that period. I'm not going to rewrite that. And more importantly, if I'm at lunch, William can run it. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So for me, it was more. I hate lone wolf DBAs, and I apologize that I've offended 99% of the people on this call. But yeah, of the wolves.
You've offended the wolves.
Yeah, I have. There's a pack. Well, this is a cool thing, right? They will now bond together and come at me. I've helped them become team members. But the lone wolf thing never sat well with me, because again, I'm an inherently lazy person who likes to go on holiday. And I encourage DBAs to work with other teams, to work with other DBAs, because again, one, you're going to be able to go on holiday, and two, you're going to learn stuff from each other. And scripting, I stored my scripts where everyone could see it, comment on it, because for me, that's healthy, because someone might find a better way of doing it, like DBA tools. Hamish, you wrote some really bad code. You could have done one line, you know? Yeah, so.
It's shocking what people let you get away with in public code. Like anyway, some things I've written and published publicly, I'm like, people will be like, that's great. And I'm like, did you look at it though? Well, you're welcome. You're totally welcome. So I've got some questions from the audience that tie into this question. So I'm going to read some of the Q&A for the audience first, and then we'll dig into this one. So we've got a question that says, what languages would you learn first? From Garrett. And then Abinas, I'm sorry if I said your name wrong, asks, is Cloud DBA or Kubernetes, is that a good move for a DBA? So questions about what languages should I learn? Should I really focus on cloud? Should I focus on Kubernetes? And then this question is, when you think about DBAs making their learning plans for this year, or like in the next year, what should people focus on? What do you think are the top 3 things that you think? And let's kind of go for maybe somebody who has 3 or 4 years of experience as a DBA, right? So mid-level DBA, not necessarily somebody who's just new into the field, but somebody who's pretty established with a DBA job.
Hands down, in a Microsoft world, PowerShell. Hands down.
Perhaps by investigating the dbatools.io website.
Yep.
It could be a great idea, yeah.
I think that is essential. I do have to say that with Azure being all Linux on the back end, learning Bash is helpful too. There are many things that PowerShell still can't do. If I can talk them into adding awk and sed and grep, I would be in heaven, honestly, into PowerShell.
Tell me a little bit about what those things are, because I've seen those words before.
Yes. So using match, there are many things that I can't do in match. in PowerShell that I can do with awk and set and grep. So to grep information out of a file means that I'm doing a find, a search. I can grab that information and then I can filter through it with awk and set in ways that I just can't do in PowerShell. When I started building out my automation scripts at Microsoft, I kept thinking, I got to do it in PowerShell. I got to do it in PowerShell. And as I built these out, even though PowerShell had very clear, just lovely one-line Azure commands, I got into all the things I needed to do with interactive scripting and making it as easy as possible for my customer to embrace it. And Bash was just more mature, especially on the Linux side. I have to say that, on the Linux side versus on Windows. And for my customers, they were going to be working in Azure. So for me, even though I find it very strange in the PowerShell, or let's try this again, in the Azure Shell interface to say I'm doing PowerShell or I'm doing Bash, to me it's an interface and I set whatever actual shell I want in my parameter, in my script, in my actual profile. That's how I should be setting that. So it's a little bizarre to me the way that it's set up. Same thing when you go onto the Azure interface and you want to grab your automation scripts, you will grab them and it'll say CLI. Those are just Bash scripts. So they're already there. They're already supported by Azure. Know that. So I think that's important. The second one is Python. Python, the database libraries are maturing so fast, and it can be used for so many different things, especially towards machine learning, which I think DBAs are going to be pulled into more and more, especially as you see some of the features with big data clusters, as well as some poly-based features. You're going to be expected to know a little bit of Python too. That's my spiel.
I like it. How about you, Hamish?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, definitely PowerShell. It's top of my list. The reason being is because, you know, most until people move towards, say, Linux and containerization, you know, majority of people are going to be running SQL Server on Windows for the next wee while. And to be honest, if you're not using PowerShell now, your career is at risk, because, and I have DBAs that say to me, I don't want to learn scripting. I don't want to learn PowerShell because I don't want to learn scripting. To which I say, please stop touching the data, because, you know, T-SQL, if you're proficient in T-SQL, you can be proficient in other scripting languages. You learned T-SQL. You didn't, like, you weren't born and within 2 years going Select Star from, you know, sippy cup.
I
no.
would have enjoyed that as a child, though. So that I wish I'd had that.
So, I mean, yeah, you learn T-SQL, learn PowerShell, because it will empower you. And and Bash is right up there, because as we move on and as Callan said, all the really good things it brings along to the to how you can automate and do your job, then yeah, that's up there, and it's not too hard to learn. And it's pretty mature, and there are so many resources out there that you can learn and you can try it out, and it's going to make your job better. So yeah, those are definitely my top two, and yeah, I'd definitely go with those ones.
So your comment about people running SQL Server on Windows now, I agree with, but I would add 2 words to that. I would add the words "in production." It's interesting. There is such an appetite for containerization now that I think that very soon we are going to see a wave of SQL Server on Linux rolling across development and test environments. We'll still have pre-production environments on the same operating system as production for a while, but I think we are going to start to see a lot of changes when it comes to the dev and test environment, simply because bam, there's a SQL Server.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
Boom, it's gone. Hey, another one.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, once Windows Auth comes to containers, we'll be running it in prod. That's the only thing holding me back at the moment. I built a sidecar Kerberos container, and I cried a lot inside. It works, but my goodness, it was hard. And I'm writing the blog post about it so that people can actually do it, so that you can use integrated security with your containers. So there you can actually run it in production. The reason why it's taken me so long is because it's pretty convoluted and I want people to be excited about it. But yeah, Microsoft is committed to bringing Windows Auth to containers. Yeah, it's a little hard.
Yeah, bleep is getting real.
Yeah.
It's really getting real. So I want to say thank you so much to Hamish, Kellen, and Williams for joining us. You guys have been awesome. Here are their Twitter accounts if you want to tweet to them. We didn't get to everybody's question today, but the questions that we didn't get to, I will make sure to forward them all to the panel, because some of the questions are going to be more Kellen specific, maybe a blog post if you can get back to them or something like that. Things like suggestions for an Oracle DBA, which I personally don't have a lot of opinions on, but I bet you do. And for other stuff coming up, we have some SQL in the City summits that folks who are watching, if you want to join us in person, you can join us in London, Los Angeles, Texas, or Australia, and we're even coming to New Zealand. That's exciting. I wish I could go to that one. You have to use a code to register there, and secret code webinar can be used to get to these events. Also, coming up next Wednesday, April 3rd, we will be doing SQL in the City stream. So I will be joined by Grant Fritchie, Steve Jones, Kathy Kellenberger, and more folks from Redgate. It's all free and online. So hit us up at redgate.com/SITC to register for that one for free. Look, I didn't even put the URL on the screen. What's up with that? So it's redgate.com/SITC. So thank you all so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. We'll have to do this again sometimes.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Kendra. Thank you, William and Hamish.
No worries.
Thanks for
Thank
getting
you.
up at 5 a.m., Hamish.
Yeah, no worries. This is me quiet.
So we get quiet Hamish if we make him get up at 4:30 for a 5 a.m. webcast. I didn't know quiet Hamish existed. Bye, y'all. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye now. Thanks.